working with groups on policy issues where you agree with them, you might actually be able to improve things on the gender side. And so my perspective is, I'm coming from this as somebody that sits in the sort of restraint community. I'm a realist, no offense to everybody that's saying it's not realistic, but I'm a realist, and I'll be the first to admit that that community has a terrible record on gender. And so I'm wondering if you see any perspective to sort of improve that side of things, working with them on issues where we all agree on things like cutting the defense budget, ending military intervention overseas, things like that. Thanks.
I'm so glad to have a friend in the room. Laura, right up here. Right on the other side.
Hi there, my name is Lauren Buda. I'm founder of Girl Security. We educate high school and middle school girls about national security. One of our brother schools to a sister school asked us to do a program to a group of sophomore and junior boys on essentially what we do with girls, which is educating girls about national security through the lens of women practitioners. And so I thought someone might have a question or a comment or a suggestion of what you would say to a room full of adolescent boys about national security.
These are really good. These are all great questions. Who would like to start? And ideally we'll go in question order if that's okay. Great.
Somebody else should go.
No, Marissa, that's you.
Oh, that's me. Okay. I think with the stuff on the Iranian nuclear deal, it's really hard to talk to somebody who like firmly believes what they believe. Like I equate sometimes like these things to like trying to convince someone like to not believe in God or whatever. Like you have your set of beliefs, and it is very difficult to kind of open yourself up to different ways of thinking when you feel like the way you think is the correct way to think. So I don't have any like practical advice other than just making the space for that conversation. And you know, arms control is like pretty much one of the top goals I think for feminist foreign policy in general. But the process of getting there, I don't think it's going to be very straightforward. I think it's just going to be, you know, a huge roller coaster. And they're really incredible groups doing really incredible work on this already. So it's not like, you know, this isn't happening. But I think we've got a long road ahead of us, as with pretty much anything. Sorry for the depressing thoughts on it.
Well, so from my perspective, I think this is a narrative issue, amongst many other things, but I think that the pathway to adjusting this is not in that room. It's by making what's said in that room untenable outside. So it's how do we change the way that these conversations are being had in broader spaces, such that when a conversation is had like that in a more closed space, the reporting out from it is not as mainstream as it currently is, right? So how do we change that narrative so that when someone says the things that you were concerned about in that session, they are the ones who are put on the defensive? And I think that can't happen in the room, right? Because they have the room, they have the space. Like if you came in here right now and started talking about men's rights, you'd be in trouble, right? So it's the same thing. They have the space. So it's how do we take that outside of that room and really change the narrative? And that's through communications work. It's through engagement. It's by making it such that the readers, whoever they may be, whether that's a public audience or whether that's the Hill or whoever it is, are looking at this with more of a critical lens. And that's hard work, but I don't think it's impossible work. I think it's just that we need to move the focus elsewhere.
I think that's an important point. I also think that it's always time when somebody accuses you, for example, of being naive, to say, wait a minute, don't you think that your idea that bringing more and more weapons into this region will lead to a peaceful outcome is naive? You know, seriously. Or in fact, we're talking about Iran. Wait a minute, didn't we at some point give them really a whole lot of weapons that then ended up in the hands of our enemies? I mean, what they're saying is also incredibly naive, or at least misguided, inaccurate. So I think that we constantly have to try to stop it. When people say those things, stop and say, don't just say, these are words that stop thinking. And you have to, and the availability of those words like realism and naivete, they stop the person who's using them from thinking as well as they stop you from speaking back. And neither one of those is good. So I think always take that opportunity, if you can, to just say, wait a minute, let's talk about what is your goal, and isn't it naive to think that what you're proposing is going to get us there?
So to Emma's question, kind of a natural segue, right? With the people when we don't always agree, is it a good idea to work together anyways? In places we do agree and try and learn something from one another. And if we have a long, fruitful discussion and and maybe we moved a little bit, but we still don't totally agree, is that okay?
I think yes, definitely. Of course, it's always easiest to go for the low-hanging fruit and chat with the people you agree with. I think with CFFP, this is something we think about a lot because, as I mentioned, we've got feminist in our name. It's pretty obvious what we do. So in a sense, who we talk to is like a very self-selecting group of people because we know if we're meeting with someone, they're already going to be to a degree on board with this agenda. But I think, kind of being able to go into these conversations and I think work through things that you may not be on the same page about. And I think particularly with feminist work, the first thing that comes to my mind is like white feminism and how to negotiate kind of these intersectional conversations when, I'm a white woman, I have a particular background. Feminism means different things to different people. It just does. We're never going to be on the same page, but I don't think that should be a barrier to fostering conversations. So in a sense, it's as much about doing the work on yourself to be able to show up better in these environments and be able to foster these really open kind of dialogues. And I think most importantly, also just to listen, because so much of what we preach, of course, is trying to bring more people to the table, listen to these voices, get them included in policy making. If we're not doing that ourselves, that's very hypocritical. So I think these, whatever the issue may be, whatever the disagreement may be, I think it's all about just going in with an open mind, listening, not thinking that you have the right answer, and letting the conversation flow. And in the same way that you would kind of probe other people, why are we thinking about this? Why do you think this is a good idea? Also be able to interrogate yourself at the same time and just be open to kind of the evolving conversation. This is a very kind of abstract answer, but I think these kinds of moments of tension are what's going to push us forward into better policy making, stronger feminist movements. We can't shy away from these things. So I think, yeah, all about it. It's difficult work. It's frustrating, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, but it's so important. Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point, not to interrupt, but abstract is not bad, right? We talk about realism as one thing and constructivism as something else, but these don't have to be so separate, and there is a place for all of these elements of how we see the world, and reacting, situational awareness is not a bad thing, right? Taking in the information as you receive it, and then determining where you're going to go from there is probably a better course of action than deciding what you're going to do and doing it regardless of what happens, right?
Yeah, and I heard another question in what you said, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the question that I also heard was, can we, by creating these sort of unlikely partnerships around places where we agree, help to drive change in the way that women are represented in spaces where, in foreign policy spaces where they're currently not well represented or respected? Was that right? Yeah, so I mean, I think I think yes, we always have to identify what are those commonalities where we can collaborate and weigh the benefit of that collaboration against the challenges that it may bring, and I think that's what traditional coalition work is really all about. So yes, I think we have to do that. I think it's a little bit stickier of a question when it becomes, is there then a responsibility or an opportunity of those partners to try to drive change within the way that this other entity is organized when it comes to women in leadership and so forth. For me, that's a stickier question, in part because we have a lot of work to do in places where there is agreement on policy to bring about this change, and so I'm not sure that the responsibility for that effort needs to fall within those partnerships. But at the same time, I do think that the more representation we have from women, from other traditionally marginalized voices within these spaces, the more likely it is that we are able to identify commonalities across policies that we maybe currently don't have in the way that you guys were describing. So for me, that's a little bit more of a sticky question. But to the first question of should we engage, should we open that door? Absolutely.
I think this is a great segue to Lauren's question, but as someone with many, many brothers, I'm so eager to know how this should be answered, or ideas on how we could answer it, I guess. Sorry, someone asked to restate the question, and Lauren, if I may be so bold, essentially, Lauren's organization, based in Boston, if you've not heard of them, please look them up. It's Girl Security. They're launching, or have launched, a badge with the Girl Scouts, which is probably the coolest thing I've ever heard. They work with high school and middle school aged girls to learn about national security, federal law enforcement, through women practitioners, and they've been approached by a brother school to one of their sister schools to come work with boys, sophomores and juniors. And what should they say to that and in that space?
We inevitably, at like all of the events we do, we always get someone asking about like how to engage men or how to engage boys. And I give the same answer every single time, which is just very simple and a starting point, but I think just telling men that it's okay just to listen sometimes. That you don't have to share your opinion always. And that whatever, I'm just saying it. And I think understanding that like sometimes coming into these, obviously with us, with these feminist spaces, it's not just about only hearing women's voices, but it's also understanding that this is a space where women feel sometimes more comfortable to share their voices, to share their thoughts and opinions. And so just respecting that environment and not feeling the need to just constantly think every thought, every question is addressed to you and you have to share everything you think about it, because I have seen that often sometimes. So yeah, that's what I would say. I don't know how to translate that into like teenage boy talk. That's very far out of
that,
my
but that's helpful. That's
field.
helpful. Yeah, that's helpful.
I would say I would take the opportunity to have a conversation about what they think about masculinity and the kinds of pressures that they feel around it, what it's okay to be and do and what it's not, and to really, take the time to tease that out so that you have it as a groundwork before you actually start talking about ideas about national security, and then it's something that you can continue about.